So today's guide is on macros, and I've logged on my Mechano Mage because mage abilities cover the broadest range of spell types to showcase what macros can do. For a lot of players, macros are intimidating, but they are also a really versatile tool for overcoming problems that you have interacting with objects in the game and targeting mobs. I don't want anyone to feel intimidated by macros, so this today is going to be a simple guide on what functionality is available through macros in the game, and hopefully this will help you to understand what the macros in the class guides that are coming in the next couple of days are doing, so that you can alter them to suit your own purposes. We're now over at the targeting dummies in Stormwind, and what I've done is I've set up a very simple macro, and all this does is it's casting Frostbolt. See, /cast Frostbolt. It's very simple. If I save that and then I drag that to my bar and then I click on a training dummy, what you'll see is if I press 2, we just cast a normal Frostbolt, and 3 does now exactly the same thing. Now the difference between these two things, if we can look at the bottom corner, is that when I mouse over 2, I get my Frostbolt tooltip. If I put the cursor over 3, I don't have that. So what we want to do is we want to update the macro to show the tooltip information. And the way you do that is by adding #show tooltip. Now if we save that and bring the cursor back down, you'll see that hovering over that provides the tooltip information. But what I've basically just done is I've set up a button that works exactly like the spell that I could have dragged out of my spellbook. So let's play around with this a bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to set our macro to target a focus target. And save. And if I close over this training dummy and press B, I now have 2 targets. I have my target and I have my focus. Now if I press 2, you'll notice that the default spell is targeting 1 dummy, and if I press 3 using the macro, I'm now casting at the focus target. But this isn't 100% reliable. If I clear my focus like this and then press 3, you'll see it just keeps saying you have no target. So let's add some conditionals to this so that this will work more efficiently. Now, conditionals are a set of, as you might guess, conditions that have to be true for this spell to be cast. So what we're going to do first is exists. That means that I have to have a focus target set, otherwise the spell won't be cast. Next we're going to add no dead, and what no dead means is the target, the focus target has to be alive in order for me to cast the spell. If I wanted that to be a resurrection spell, I would put dead in there rather than no dead. And the last one is harm, and harm means that the creature that I am targeting has to be hostile. If I wanted to cast a heal spell on something, I might put help in there instead. So now I want to save that, and now if I don't have a focus target, you'll simply see doesn't do anything. And if I target that and set it as my focus target and then target this and press 3, you'll notice that it now is registering that I have a focus target, that that focus target exists, and that it is not dead, and that it is hostile. But I've got all that on one single button, and as you can see, if I now target my water elemental and set that as my focus target and move back over to there and press 3, the spell still doesn't do anything, which is frustrating. So let's add a couple of conditions, a couple more conditions, but let's also add something that's very useful in this particular situation. And what we're going to add is \pet attack. Oops, spell that right. Now, what pet attack is going to do is that when I press this button, it is going to make my water elemental attack whatever I am targeted at. What we're going to do is we're going to add focus target, and what this does is it targets what your focus is targeting. So in this case it will target whatever my water elemental is targeting. Now this is a really useful condition to add to your macros if you have visual acuity problems or you find click targeting difficult, because it means you can set another player as your focus and ensure that every spell that you cast which has a macro with this in, all of those abilities will be going to whatever that person is targeting. So you're not going to accidentally fire off a spell into a pack of mobs somewhere else and accidentally pull, or you're not going to pull aggro off something accidentally. Obviously this is a DPS spell, so of course we want the target to exist, we want it to be alive, and we want it to be hostile if we're going to cast this spell. So we just save that like so, and then if I press button 3, you'll notice that the first thing that will happen is my water elemental will start attacking, and then the minute I cast, it will go to exactly the same target. Now even if I click on a different mob, as I've done there, if you press the button, you will see that I'm still targeting that, but it will shift the movement, because the pet attack will ensure that whatever my pet is attacking, I am attacking as well. So as soon as my pet switches targets, my target will also change. Now this is fairly useful. As I said, it has its uses if you find targeting mobs by clicking, or you don't want to be reliant on tab targeting, and you can trust the person who you set as your focus. This is a really, really useful macro. But I'm going to add one extra condition now, and that is at target. Of course we want that target to exist, we want it to be alive, and we want it to be hostile. Excuse me. So we do this. Now if we clear my focus, and what I can do is if I press 3 now, it targets the dummy that I'm targeting. And if I set my training dummy as a focus and I press 3, you'll notice that it's still targeting my focus target, because I have a focus target that is hostile and alive. And even if I my pet changes target, I will still continue to attack the focus target. So this is something to be aware of. And now, of course, finally, if I set my water elemental as my focus target and press it, I will target exactly the same thing that my water elemental is targeting. Now, the way that this works fundamentally, if I clear my focus and remove that, is that this is now a priority system. What that macro is targeting is first my focus target. Second, if that focus target is hostile or dead, it will target whatever the focus is targeting, provided that that is alive and hostile. And if that's also not true, it will then target whatever I am targeting, unless it is dead or friendly. And this basically means that I've got the ability to target 3 individual things, depending on what I'm doing. Now, this does have weaknesses. As I said, this is a priority system, which means that in a clinch situation, if you have to change your target, you may not be able to do that. And as I said, that if you have a focus, it's going to that's hostile. Say you set a boss mob as your focus target, all of your spells are going to end up on the boss mob because you have a focus, it is alive, and it's, you know, hostile. But if you set the tank as your focus and the tank is attacking the boss, you'll still attack the boss, because as long as the tank is targeting the boss. And if I don't target, or if I don't have a focus at all, it will target whatever I am clicking on. But it will do it in that order. Now, there are situations, for example, where you might have, Arena is a good example of this. You might have put a healer, an enemy healer, in as a focus, and you want to be able to silence that mob without swapping target. And this is what modifiers really are for. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at this Iceland spell. This is set to E on my toolbars right now. So if I target this and I set this as my focus, and then I target this one, you'll notice that if I press E, I'm targeting this dummy, and if I press Alt and E, I target the other dummy. Now, the way that this is working is I'm using 2 additional modifiers. No mod means no modifier applies, and mod Alt means if I press the Alt key. You could also put Control Alt or Shift, mod Control or mod Shift in there. Now, this is really useful, as I said, in situations where you may want to cast a spell on a focus target or on your target. You just want to switch between the 2. Or if you want to cast one spell or another spell, for example, you might want to put Sunfire or Moonfire, you know, and you want to change between the 2. But you know, or if you're playing a rogue and you want to teleport, you want to shadow step behind your focus target or behind your target, you know, these are good examples of how to use this sort of functionality. I'll cover it in more detail in the class specific guides. There is one proviso with doing this though. It will take up the slot of the macro that you're using. So Alt and E will cast on my focus target, provided that I do not assign Alt and E to any other shortcut, and I don't bind it to another spell. You'll notice on my toolbar, for example, that I have Frost Nova set to 1 Frostbolt set to 2. Now if I put Control 2 on, it would try to activate the slot on my toolbar that Control 2 is bound to, and there currently isn't a spell there. And Shift 3 is the same. So what would happen is it wouldn't cast the spell. But the macro would still fire, it just wouldn't cast Control 3 or Shift 3. So if you're going to do this, make sure that the buttons that you're adding, so if you're putting this on 3, make sure that Control 3, Shift 3 and Alt 3 aren't assigned to something else on your toolbar and aren't bound to anything in the in-game menu, and then it should work just fine. So the other thing I want to talk about is what I affectionately refer to as cast and click spells. Cast and click spells are things like Blizzard, Demon Hunter Sigils, Death and Decay, Hunter Traps. When you press the button to cast them, you will get an aiming reticule which will allow you to place them in the world where you want to put them. Now, you cannot cast these at target. If you put that in the text, the macro won't work. You have two options on how to do this. The first is at cursor and the second is at player. Now if you look at the macro that I've currently got on screen, you'll notice that if I press Q, he's going to cast Blizzard directly centered on the cursor location. And if I press Alt and Q, wait for it to come off cooldown, he's going to cast it centered on himself. It's not the most useful thing as a mage, being able to cast Blizzard centered on yourself. I suppose if you manage to get a Frost Nova out and then a Blizzard and then blink away, that could be a use for this. It's far more useful to be able to cast it at your cursor, which is what most high level players would probably have set their macro to. And this basically gives you a bit more freedom, but you do have to be careful of where your cursor is. And obviously if you have motor issues, your hand shakes when you're holding a mouse, there's some fluctuation in where you're actually going to get the cursor cast down. Personally, particularly if you're going to be using a controller, if you have the cursor set directly in front of you at a set distance, you can just wait till the cursor is in the right place, moving yourself and of course the location of the cursor. Try and get the cursor in the place that you want it and then hit the button. That is one way around it, and you don't then have to move the cursor, so your input is far more stable. And as I said, with gamepad support, that's something that could be useful to a lot of people. The final thing that I want to talk about in this video is cast sequence macros. Cast sequence macro, like the one that you can see on the screen right now, I'm just making sure that in the right slots in my toolbar, is a sequence of spells. And what you can see in this one is that what it's going to do, if I move to here, is it's going to cast Blizzard at the cursor location, and then it's going to cast Frostbolt 3 times. So if we do that, you'll see where we get Blizzard, and then we get Frostbolt, Frostbolt, and Frostbolt. Now this isn't particularly reactive. If you have a reaction ability, that you need to cast on a proc or at a specific time, a cast sequence macro really isn't very helpful. But what you can do, and what I use cast sequence macros for, is if we go over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to alter this. And what we're going to do is we're going to put reset equals 7. Now, if you mouse over Blizzard, you'll see that the cooldown on Blizzard is 7.2 seconds. So 0.2 seconds in alright. But what this will do is it will reset this sequence, back to Blizzard every 7 seconds. So if I put the mouse cursor over here and I press Q, that's 1.8 seconds for Blizzard, that's 1.8 seconds for Frostbolt, and Frostbolt 2, and Frostbolt 3, and Blizzard comes off cooldown and it goes back to the beginning. And this effectively means I could put 6, 7, 8 or 9 Frostbolts in this macro, and obviously that isn't particularly useful in this instance, but it would mean that once Blizzard comes off cooldown, the macro will reset back to the beginning of the cast sequence, allowing me to once again cast Blizzard. An example of something that this is good for in game, if you've got a Worgen Rogue, you have 2 effective sprint abilities which you could macro, putting the one with the shorter cooldown in first so that you always cast that if that's available when you press the button, and if it's not available it will cast the second one, but the macro will reset again once the first one comes back off cooldown. Or if you're playing Blood Elf Demon Hunter, you can set up a macro for Consume Magic and Arcane Torrent, so that once you press the button it will cast Consume Magic. If Consume Magic is on cooldown it will cast Arcane Torrent, but the macro will reset when Consume Magic resets, so provided that you don't press the sequence multiple times within the Consume Magic cooldown, you will always be using Consume Magic instead of Arcane Torrent. It's just a useful way of reducing the number of buttons on your cast bar. Another example of a way that you can use macros is by adding a condition like stop casting. Now, stop casting means that if you are casting a spell, it will immediately cancel that cast and cast the spell that you are using. So if we target the combat dummies all the way at the back and we press 2 and then we press Alt 1, you'll notice that it immediately cancelled the cast of the Frostbolt and cast Blink to move me forward. That's a really useful way of ensuring that a defensive ability, panic heal, or some sort of mobility mechanic that you can use to get you out of trouble goes off irrespective of what you are currently doing. Another thing you can do is you can add toys or other abilities that are off the global cooldown into your macro. Now in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to target Cherry, who's playing over there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my blink macro, and what you know is after I've blinked, I automatically activate the toy and take on her appearance. Now if you want something other than a toy, for example, you might want to activate the buff on your cloak or a specific trinket cooldown, or if you're leveling you might want to activate your heal on your necklace. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to find the item slot that it is equipped to. Now these aren't sequential, the numbers aren't in sequence. Now I've put the numbers on the slots on the screen so you can see. And then what you'll need to do is you'll need to type the slot number after use. So use, in this case, I want to use my necklace, so it's going to be use 2. And now if I save that, and I close my character window, and I press Alt 1, you'll also see that when I blinked, he also healed. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope this guide was helpful, and as always I'm happy to answer any questions you have, you can contact me on Twitter at @Warcraft, or you can leave it in the comments below. Until next time, please do get in touch.